Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jason Robbins with Roy Solutions. Welcome to this episode of our Putting the Pieces Together webinar. Our goal is pretty simple in these webinars, really to share and to learn together as a nonprofit community. We're going to continue to ask our clients and our partner network to present on new ideas, best practices, and things like that. So if you'd like to share, or if you have a topic you'd like us to explore, please send me your ideas. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Richard Geiger, Senior Vice President of Data Axle, who's going to share 6 steps to create a successful omni-channel marketing campaign. As we jump in, we're hopeful we can make it as interactive as possible. So you are already, but continue to use the chat and introduce yourselves, where you are, how the weather is outside. And then throughout the sessions, put your questions into the Q&A, and I'll do my best to politely interrupt and jump in, and we should have a little bit of time at the end for a more formal Q&A period. So Richard, you start sharing, I'll start learning.
All right, so thumbs up. Jason, quick question, screen looking good? All right, thumbs up. So here's a picture of my mug shot. And what we wanted to do is quickly introduce myself. I've been in the nonprofit space for the past 20 years, and I've been in nonprofit technology, analytics, business process, and strategy. And I've worked on both the vendor and the nonprofit side. And I'm really excited to sort of talk to you today about data and omni-channel work, because it's sort of the next part of my journey, moving from the technology to the outcomes and actions, it helps me use some of my work as an urban and regional planner. So we're going to talk a little bit about planes, trains, and automobiles and see how that translates into data and activities. Before we get started, I just want to share a little bit about Data Axle and the work that we do. You all probably know us in one of our former names, either being Info Group or Triplex or Larry May Company. So we've got a long history out there, and we're combined to really provide a lot of good data that emanates for outcomes. So just to give you a sense, we take in over 19 billion records per month, and we do something with them. In our business data file, we actually keep track of about 15 to 16 million US businesses. And it's the actual file that actually makes the US Postal Service run to deliver business mail. It's also the file and the data points that Google hits, Google Waze hits, Alexa, Microsoft Bing. On our consumer file, we actually keep track of about 300 million US consumers and about $2 trillion worth of their spend. And that spend is over sort of a 12-month rolling window. And that file actually seeds the US the US Census Bureau. And then when you go all the way to the right and go to our specialty data sets, the one that I want to highlight for you today, and we're going to talk about a lot, is our donor genetics, or our donor data set. And we actually keep track of a Data Axle, 75 million US donors, which translates to about 59-60 million US households. You know, in that file, we look at things like how much do people give, how much do they give by vertical, what kind of channels do they give, and what kind of gifts do they give, right? And what makes us most well-positioned in the spaces, right, is that the donor data connects to the consumer data, connects to the business data, so that if you have somebody that you understand has some kind of inclination or donor behavior, you can actually tie it to their consumer behavior. So we're really proud at Data Axle of sort of putting together, right, the demo trends, the philanthropic behaviors, the consumer behaviors, and the channel engagement. All right, let's get into the omni-channel stuff. So the question really becomes, why are we talking about omni-channel now, and what does omni-channel mean? And the first one is, I don't know if it's a cop-out or if it's just sort of the standard answer when you don't know. It's not the dog ate my homework. It's, oh, we had COVID, right? So Omnichannel today is a little bit more important and a little bit more, we've had some more time to spend on it because we've had the lack of in-person events where we've gotten a lot of revenue over the time. And here's a picture of, I think, an outdoor rubber chicken dinner. I was kind of hoping we'd see a nice balloon arch for everybody who's used to their peer-to-peer work. We know that folks are donating more online today, but we also don't know the metrics of what's causing them to donate online. So that sort of that omni-channel sort of takes care of that. And we also know that multiple devices are in play. So, you know, if you had talked to me 10 years ago and I had shown you my iPhone, I would have said, I will never give a donation on an iPhone. I will always have to go to my laptop. Well, today it's a little bit different. People are not only using smartphones, tablets, PCs, but they're using their TVs as well, and all sorts of different devices. And so the question is how do we think about meeting the donors where they are and where they're going? So that's why omnichannel is important. One of the things that we like to talk about, I guess, in nonprofits and in the industry overall is like, what's the difference between multi-channel marketing and omni-channel marketing, right? And nobody's going to get a demerit or have to put a quarter in the jar if they say multi-channel instead of omni-channel or omni-channel instead of multi-channel. But the two terms really aren't interchangeable. They actually mean two different things. You know, and when we refer to multi-channel, and I think a lot of us do this in the nonprofit space, it's sort of like covering all our bases around the different channels and then running those campaigns simultaneously, right? And maybe there's crossover and maybe there's not. We don't know, right? The differentiator is, right, is that in the omni-channel environment, instead of identifying a specific Facebook campaign or direct mail campaign or email campaign, you identify an audience that would be interested in sort of engaging with you and then understand what their journey is across the channels, right? So the channels, you know, stay the same, but they reflect the values and the things that the constituent is looking for, right? So it's really more about this sort of the streamlined and consistent experience around that. And it's interesting in the space, right? Because we sort of do this right now sometimes depending upon what kind of technology we have and what we have the ability to have an effect upon. So, you know, old school, maybe we call it multi-channel, maybe we call it omni-channel, right? You put a banner out there, you put a Facebook survey out there and you say, I'm the blah, blah, blah XYZ disease organization. Are you interested in patient services or are you interested in research? Well, if I check the patient survey, you know, bucket on my survey and the organization is able to take that in, maybe the landing page has to do with patient services. Maybe the email welcome series has to do with patient services. Maybe the newsletter is patient services. The ask is about patient services. So there's a way where you've got a lot of different channels, but you're molding it to what the, you know, what the prospect or the constituent is looking for. And so, you know, it's really, if you were to put like a little checklist together, you know, multi-channel is really typically about lots of silos working at the same time. And omni-channel is really about a personalized experience. Multi-channel is typically about repeating lots of messages over and over again to sort of complete a call to action. But the messaging may be very stagnant, you know, the same message over and over again, but just repeats a lot, versus an omni-channel experience where you would think about how do I figure out what the constituent is, who they are, what they're interested in, how do I gather their behaviors, how do I act on those behaviors, and how do I make sure when they make the move from channel A to channel B to channel C that there's consistency around. All right, so I'm gonna take a breath here and we're gonna go to the 6 steps. This is the part that I know Derek has been looking forward to. So the 6 steps sort of go like this, right? Step 1 is we need to do audit data and we need to see what we have. Step 2 is is really understand a 360-degree view of your audience. Now, I'm glad that I can't hear everybody across the country sort of groan. What? A 360-degree view? I've never heard that before. What? So we're going to talk a little bit about why this is important and why it's different. We're going to talk about step 3, how you take the 360-degree view and add additional audiences to that. We're going to talk about picking which channels you want to engage in and how to engage in them. We're going to talk about campaign structures and goals and measuring results. So that's the journey we're on for the next, I don't know, 30 minutes or so. All right, audit data. So the first thing that the database doctor would typically say is, what kind of data do I have and where does it fit? The second thing, or the new diagnosis from the database doctor would say, how do I audit my data against the programs and the channels that I'm working on? And what does that mean? Well, if you really want to have a text to give campaign, you need good cell phone numbers. Not too smart to, go hire that up if you don't have the data that supports it. You want to have a good email campaign, you probably need to have some good email hygiene in those pieces around that. So we're going to talk about the difference between those two. So nothing new here. We know that everybody's got tons of different types of data. They've got donor data, third-party data, model data, demographic data, mission data, basic, unbasic, external, programmatic, right? You need sort of an inventory of what's there, how are you collecting it, and how are you using it? And there was a study that was done, and I'm going to read them from my notes, so I will look up, I promise. It said something like this: that 50% of the organizations that responded to the survey about data said that they weren't really sure why or how data would support their work. But those same study participants, 87% of them said collecting data is the most important thing to do, right? So there's a little bit of a challenge there that says, okay, we have to collect data, but we don't know how it's going to affect our work. And so making it actionable, and the reason why we do it, we've never really figured that out, right? And I think omni-channel data, omni-channel marketing, omni-channel engagement, even multi-channel begins to help us understand what the connection between the two are. From a programmatic standpoint, auditing against the channel, right? So if you've got an event channel, mobile channel, CTV, direct mail, what have you, do you have the data that supports it? And if you have it in a multi-channel environment, great, you may be ready to move to omni-channel. If you don't have the data that supports multi-channel, then you probably need to stop there before you go to omni-channel and fix multi first. And again, back in the day before email, before we were not able to send emails to everybody, right, without any bad happening to us, we used to do email hygiene. We used to say, okay, is richard@juno.com a good email address? Well, I'm here to tell you, when I got that email address, I don't know, 23 years ago, it still works. But guess what? I don't use it anymore. And so as I've signed up with nonprofit organizations to send me notes through that richard@juno.com, I don't really open them and I don't look at them, right? But it's a deliverable address. You're not getting zapped, right? So doing your programmatic audit, do you have an active email address, and do you have a marketable email address? And do you have a marketable email address that actually someone is using? And so there's a difference between having just good versus marketable, right? And then that same example, if you're going to send text messages, you better have text cell phone numbers. You better understand whether or not the people on your file actually use cell phones before you decide to find their cell phone numbers, right? So think about the program audit against the different kinds of channels. And then the last piece here is sort of like, goes back to, database 101, right? You have to understand what data are you collecting, how are you going to update it, how you're going to use it, and then how you're going to measure it. So we know in a direct mail situation or in mailing that we've done in nonprofits, NCOA takes care of all of that. we get people's addresses, they sign up, we update through NCOA, we use it at the mail house, and we we measure by maybe number of gifts in through our cagers, or we also measure in by pieces of return mail, right? That's an easy one. But like, the other example that I normally talk about is, in the winter, my wife is very much a dark brown, sort of brunette kind of hair color. And if I've decided at my nonprofit I'm going to collect hair color, how do I know that in the summer she doesn't go lighter? Right? So maybe interesting to collect, maybe room in the data set to put it, but if you're not going to update it, you're not going to use it or have a metrics, you may want to skip it. Last piece here that I really want to talk about in terms of the data audit and the program audit is, we did a study at Data Axle back in, January-ish that said, how do donors like to be communicated with, right? And so this was sort of the top end of the survey. Almost 50% of them said that they like to be communicated through email, 21% direct mail, what have you. But there's actually a corresponding chart, which I don't know if we have in here or not. If not, we can share it later, that says, even though they're communicated through email, they actually give through a different channel. So understanding this idea of, right, multi-channel, I'm going to talk to you through all these channels, omni-channel, I'm going to figure out how you want to be communicated, and I'm going to tell that story through all the channels. But it's pretty important to understand that the negative or the challenge around the multi-channel piece is you can't really work in a silo, if that makes sense. All right. Next one on the list, not backwards, let's go forwards. I talked a little bit about email, and this is from another study that we did at Data Axle around nonprofit email deliverability. And there's three things to take away from here, right? 1 in 5 emails didn't reach their intended recipient. 1 in 6 emails got addressed to the wrong person, right? And 1 in 4 were deleted even before they were opened. So those of you that manage digital campaigns and digital email programs are probably thinking, wow, that's really going to put me on the bad list with some of the providers. And so how do I work through that? This is, again, a big part of that data audit piece. ISPs look at all of these different pieces. So again, I put this up on the screen. We all know this because we have to manage digital programs all the time. But if we're not proactive in looking at those pieces, our file is going to age and going to become inactive very quickly, and email hygiene isn't going to solve that problem. It's a more holistic approach. Now, this one is actually a no-brainer, but not until I came to Data Axle did I say, wow, does this really make sense? And my sense is, again, you all in the digital space who manage digital campaigns get this, right? If you take your entire file and you raise the inbox placement of those folks, you will automatically see lift. Because what do we know about digital acquisition today? It's hard and expensive. So if you work the file that you have to the bone, you will get lift just by having more emails hit inboxes. And what does that mean, having more emails hit inboxes? Well, what it means is that you need to be able to know that richard@juno.com is really richard@gmail.com. And you need to stop sending to him to Juno and send him at Gmail, right? We did this little bit of this program at the American Heart Association, and this started, we did this probably about a year ago, July, August of last year, and they came to us and they said, we have these 6 million emails that have been hanging around for the past, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. They were really lapsed in age, and they hadn't done anything with them. And what was even more interesting about them, and I wish we had sound for all the participants because we'd hear this gasp. Most of these 6 million names came from peer-to-peer fundraising, right? So we all know how great it is to get peer-to-peer folks to convert into a mission-based program, exceptionally hard, right? So we have all these folks and they're like, how can we reactivate them? Digital acquisition's expensive and it's hard. So how are we gonna do this? Well, we did some work with them to reactivate and re-opt in those 6 million folks. And we got about 470,000 people reactivated. So that means they opt in to get a newsletter or some sort of communication stream from the Heart Association, or they actually gave a gift. And what we found from those folks is that the people who actually reactivated with a gift, it was a higher average gift than they were getting through an email acquisition list, because these are people that actually knew the Heart Association. The other thing that we did to sort of get them from 6 million sort of names floating out there, it was understanding which of those email addresses were now non-deliverable, active, and marketable, right? So active emails are great because they'll land in the inbox, but it doesn't mean they'll be open. Marketable emails mean people actually use them, right? So it's sort of a new distinction in the space. And we're continuing on this campaign with Heart, and I think today we're up to like 750, 800,000, 850,000 folks who have reactivated themselves into these new campaigns and with these new sort of creatives that we've tested. So that's been kind of fun.
And Richard, if I could
Yes.
jump in there, and if you could
Please.
maybe go back a
Sure.
slide. Are you, and it was a sort of built on a question that came in. Are you doing this with sort of other episodic donors, right? So emergency situations, or even COVID, right? So unprecedented number of sort of unsolicited online gifts, right? What, what's that mechanism to keep them, interested in the mission, or to figure out if they're convertible into a regular?
Well, so I think there's 2 or 3 things to that, right? Thing
Yeah.
number 1 is at the Heart Association, these were email addresses that were exceptionally lapsed.
Okay.
So the first thing that we had to do there was understand and look at our proprietary global suppression table to sort of force rank them and understand, are these email addresses still good? If they're not good, can we find out the right person that they're using today? If they are active, are they marketable, and can we do that, right? Then we look at the source code of where they came in the first time to see what they did. And then at the Heart Association, they sort of added this A/B testing around, if we found out that these were women, we gave them the women campaign and the women are strong. If we, if it was more of a general, a jump rope-a-thon, and it was a parent's email address, they got a different kind of outreach. So it's really the mix of how good is the email address in landing in the inbox? What's the offer that you're sending to them to test them out for mission-based activities? And then the third piece is what in the model or in their demo says their likelihood to re-engage. So, I think at the Heart Association, and we may have done this with another project as well, or a different project, we looked at our donor set and we said, if they give to Heart, what are the other adjoining things that they give to? Do they give to other cause and cure organizations, or, do they give to dogs, or, how, so
Right.
it were all those pieces. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yeah, that's great. No, that's super.
Okay. The Heart Association, we have a whole campaign brief case study on the Data Axle website. So if you want to go look at that, it's on the Data Axle website. And Sherry Minton and my colleagues from Data Axle presented at the Bridge conference on this. So we have a whole, I don't know, hour and a half presentation on the Data Axle website if you missed it at Bridge. All right, step 2 on the getting to know your folks. So here's the one that I think everybody's really going to love and be able to relate to, right? Every organization has multiple siloed constituency files, right? Here are some examples: advocacy files, volunteer files, direct mail files, digital files. peer-to-peer files, mission, I don't know, major gift, whatever they are, event, chicken dinner, right? And so the question becomes, right, where is the overlap between all of these pieces, right? So the story that I like to tell about this, and this is really the key to omnichannel, right? Because omnichannel is about people going and traveling through different kinds of channels as opposed to multi-channel, where we just sort of push all the channels and we say, go, right? This was probably maybe 10 or 15 years ago. There was a large cause and cure organization, and they used 3 of the most popular software providers at the time, which are now all dead. They used Team Approach, and they used that for direct mail, major gift, system of record, and their call center. So they had some donor data in there, and they had some mission data in there. They used Kintera. Kintera, who ever heard of that, right? They did peer-to-peer in there, and they did their email campaigns in there. And then they used this other thing, which I never heard of for a long time, Convio, right? They did more peer-to-peer in there, their other peer-to-peer program, their email program, and their advocacy program in there, right? But they had no idea of who was in Team Approach, who was in Kintera, and who was in Convio. They were 3 separate groups. So they went with their agency, and they said to their agency, how do I understand and value my constituents? I know what my campaigns are doing, but I don't understand my constituents or my constituent behaviors. So what they did is they took all those files and they did this 360-degree view project. They put them all together and they looked at source codes of where they came in and where they ended up, and they actually created constituent lifetime values for each of those folks on the file. And what they did is they actually used that data to figure out who do I want to acquire and how and which channel. And they may have made some decisions to say, I want to acquire people through mission and maybe make them go to direct mail, even though it may cost more money to acquire them through mission, there'll be a higher value in the direct mail channel, right? So they actually had that looked, so they overlapped constituent value with campaign value. Now the thing is you think about this and you say, okay, this is really hard, this is really tough, and this is going to take a long time. Well, 10 or 15 years ago, it really did, because the technology wasn't there. Today, all you would really need to do is take all your files and then just, instead of doing a merge purge, do a merge dedupe with some source codes and then put some demographics behind it. And that's your 360-degree view. So it's as easy as preparing a mail file to actually understand constituent value today, as opposed to as it was, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But this is really pretty key to the piece. So here's the part where we're going to start talking about data modeling for a few minutes. And we're gonna end stage step 2 and start moving to step 3, right? Data models help provide synergy and create that baseline understanding of who we're talking to and why, right? And when you think about it, at Data Axle, our donor data set's called Apogee, but we actually sort of combine donor data, political data, consumer data, and transactional data, not unlike some of the other co-ops in the space, whether you work with Abacus or Wyland or the Target Cooperative. But it's really about taking the data that you know about your donors and then adding those outside pieces to it, right? Well, when you do that, right, you create sort of these models, and then those models sort of reveal, what are the hidden factors that we are looking for to achieve our goals, whether it be larger brand recognition or whether it be higher conversion rates, people going directly to sustainers, major gifts, all that kind of stuff. And at Data Axle, we really support all different kinds of modeling in the space, right? So whether or not you're a big fan of the old school clone models or affinity audiences where we say, here are people that look like Richard, let's get more people that look like Richard, or not get any more people that look like Richard, or looking at, you know, some of the newer models that we're doing with Panorama and the neural patterns, where, you know, you take multiple models, sort of mush them together and do a higher regression analysis. So there's lots of different modeling, lots of different ways to test it, and that's good. So then we get to the next thing, right? What do we do with it? Acquisition, email acquisition, lapse. We know how to use models, but the question is once we do the model, how do we get the additional audiences? That's really the next important part. Okay, and so when we talk about getting the next important, when we talk about getting the people, it's sort of like, okay, we do the model, we do the demographic profiling, we put these people together, and then how do we activate it to actually create audiences? So, you know, the example that I would give you here is last summer, I was working with a large cause and cure organization that had a 50% reduction in their overall revenue because peer-to-peer programs stopped. And so they said, how are we going to take all of this data and all these people that we know that were event-based participants or even direct mail participants, and how are we going to figure out and monetize that and understand where can we get more stuff? So the way that we did this at this client is we did a model and we looked at buying behaviors and lifestyle behaviors of their event participants, and we actually came up with quantitative data points to help their corporate and cause marketing teams go market their file to corporate and cause marketing partners that had an interest in that audience, right? Now, if you're the, I don't know, the American Cancer Society, the March of Dimes, the Alzheimer's Association, I don't know, one of these disease people, you would totally say, I'm just gonna call pharma. Anybody who has a drug that would, you know, help this cause or this disease is a great, you know, match. Well, this organization that I worked with, which was also a disease, what we found is that they had a higher propensity to have dogs. And they also had a higher propensity to have rescue dogs. And so there was a whole additional new market that we opened up for their cause marketing fundraisers to go find the Petcos, the places that sell dog stuff, right? So anyway, interesting piece there. Real life example around using models. The folks at Defenders of Wildlife came to us and they wanted to do a CTV program, a connected TV program. And the program had 3 goals. It was to, you know, number 1, raise awareness, 2, engage prospects, and 3, increase their fundraising. What we know about this is that they took their direct mail file and they took their best donors from that file, and then we modeled those folks who actually had an interest and a inclination to use additional channels besides direct mail. So who is internet savvy, who had just bought a smart TV, what were all the things that would said we could catch them on connected TV. So we created this model, and we were able to actually take the best donor behaviors and then add the best sort of behaviors we wanted for connected TV. And we identified, I don't know, another 2-3 million people to serve connected TV ads to. And when they came back, what was really great about it is the average gift size was higher than direct mail. The average income of these people was larger than direct mail. It was a larger female audience. The audience was a little bit younger. So, you know, we were able to take what they knew, the behaviors they wanted, do the modeling, and pump it into the channel, right? All right, we're gonna get to step 4. We're getting closer here. All right, so smart channel selection. You need to engage in channels where you have the ability to target, refine, audit, and measure. And this is really important because at the end of the day, when you look at what your channels are, right, You need to look, do I have the data to engage in the channel? Do I have the content that the channel requires? Do I have the audience that's interested in the channel? So we know that, you know, if you've got a younger audience, they may not be Facebook, they may be Snapchat, right? And then you also need to know what kind of outcomes you're looking for, because if you're looking for brand awareness, that's a different kind of offer in the quote unquote Facebook channel as opposed to a fundraising piece, right? So think about the channels that you're looking for. Think about how you're going to manage across those channels, and think about how you're going to activate through them, right? And this is the part here that I think is actually the thing to think about. In the digital space, I'd venture to guess most every organization on this call has gone to Facebook and done a lookalike audience. Probably so. What's the biggest challenge with a lookalike audience? You don't know who the people are. You know who they look like. They wear blue shirts, they have short black hair, they talk a lot, all that good stuff. But we don't know actually who they are. And so this idea of going to an omni-channel environment and having and engaging with folks that you have an audience, but you don't know who the people are, makes it a lot harder to measure and to curate that experience as it goes from channel to channel, right? So one of the things that you want to think about when you want to launch or try an omni-channel campaign is start with people and not cookies, right? Because if you start with people, you can have their postal address. So if you want to catch up with them on mail, you can do that. You can get their best email address. You can get their best cell phone number. You can get their best landline number. You can figure out you can figure out those behaviors. And you can also match back across the channel. So you actually know I'm delivering this CTV ad to this person, right? Can't necessarily do that with a cookie and then follow up with a direct mail piece. You'd sort of, you know, in the zone, but not a match. All right. So questions to think about when you're activating, right? Does the channel support your does the channel support your outcome? What'd your data audit say? You know, have you run something already? Like, do you do social media and have you seen good results, right? So if you do social media and it's not working, before you go to something else, fix social media first, right? Do you have the basics covered, and right, are you using the right channel to maximize engagement and efficiency? And you really need to think about it. Am I pointing a specific audience, people I know, to the channel, or am I just sort of throwing things out there? And it's not bad to throw things out there. Just know what your outcomes and your measurements are going to be.
And I might even add into that one, Richard, too, if you go back
Sure.
a nudge, and determine what data you're going to be collecting from each of these channels, right? And
100%.
how it's going to flow into the overall learning about or the 360-degree view, or whatever you want. Whatever.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? Because one of the things, you know, with some of the smaller organizations that we work with, we say, okay, if you're going to do email acquisition, do you have a system that's actually going to be able to capture an email address
right.
and a source code, and then actually send an email from it? Maybe, maybe not, right? Or are you going to be able to, if you capture an email address, do you need to do a reverse append to figure out the name and the address of the person before it goes into your system, right? Because, you know, typically the digital people may not talk to the database administrators, and they may say, in our system, you can't have email address. You have to have a name. So got to think about those things. Good point, Jason. All right, campaign structures and goal setting. So that's next on the list, number 5, right? If you're doing a campaign where you're trying to understand audience engagement, do you have a benchmark to understand if they already know your brand, right? So, you know, campaign goals need to start with sort of a line in the sand and understand what you want to measure and how you know you've been successful, right? If you're trying to do a match back on a connected TV lift, you know, how are you going to match back the awareness of eyeballs on that to a lift in fundraising if you don't have a holdout audience, or you don't have targeted audiences where you do things together? Not so much. So really think about, you know, what's the one thing you want to learn per channel? and then sort of put that in the sand and test and measure and test and measure again, right? And then measuring the results. So what's interesting here, right? John Wanamaker, all of us from Philadelphia, right? He used to say, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half it is, right? And so the thing I want you to take back on measuring results is everybody knows how to do a match back. Everybody knows that sometimes the direct mail person, the digital person sort of take it out to the parking lot and they say, no, it was my ad that did that. No, it was my mail piece that did that. No, it was my ad. You know, they go backwards and forwards. You can actually do the quantitative look at that if you understand and set up the tests beforehand, and you actually are starting with people and not cookies. So think about that component. And when you think about measuring the results, always think about what's the campaign value versus the constituent value. And you know, that organization 15 years ago, that constituent value and that constituent value measurement was just as important as knowing how did any one campaign do work on. And understanding campaign value versus constituent value, it's a tough paradigm shift to work on and think about, because it's definitely a new metric. So here we are at the end, at the conclusion. One big thing to say here, right? Most organizations that we're working with today are doing some kind of multi-channel and some kind of omni-channel. The question is can they step up their game by looking at data, doing the audit, seeing what the goals are? And really, when we go see and talk to clients today, and when we stand outside at the Bridge conference and people are chattering in the hall, we think about, you know, most organizations are really good at one channel like social, and they're also really good at having integrated email, social, and web, because that's typically under one house. But like put email, social, web, and search with direct mail, and then everything goes crazy, right? Because direct mail is still probably the strongest channel for unrestricted gifts on the way in, and using the results for the testing and helping folks go through that omni-channel experience is probably one of our last frontiers. And then Jason says we end up with don't be shy. So it's 1:45. I think I did okay, but we'll see if we have any questions.
You did great, and we will open it up to some questions. One just came in. Let me look at it. Yeah, when it comes to measuring campaign success, the tactics on your last slide, so couple back, that could replace attribution models given a cookie-less world.
So the good news about the cookie-less world is we all got a reprieve, right? So we all have another few years to sort of plan how we're going to work on the other side of the cookie-less world. I think the challenge and the piece and things that we're looking at Data Axle today is, you know, how do we identify and understand the best demographics for the people in your model? And that includes best email, best cell phone, best address, all that boring stuff. But it also puts on top of that things that we have in sort of target ready models that tell us Richard likes to get mail, but he fulfills on the web. Or Richard gets an email and then he goes to the web to fulfill the gift. He doesn't follow the link, he does something else. So there are some other things that we're doing from a modeling perspective to pick up where those cookies left off. And we now have more time to test them because we got that little reprieve.
Great answer. Another question. One second. So talk a little bit more, if you could, about sort of the quantitative data driving sort of the qualitative outreach, right? So that was interesting too, because it was looking at, you know, the data that we have both on audience and response, and then really driving sort of creative or channel.
Yeah, so what's really interesting, right? when I started in fundraising and in business process for fundraising, all those things, I learned in a major gift shop. And the first lesson I learned from moving from major gifts into mass marketing is that in mass marketing, RFM was always RFM. And it was always very quantitative and very measurable. In major gifts, we had that qualitative view, which said, they feel like they could do this. They smiled when I said this. They did these things. And how did I create quantitative measures of those feelings, right? And so today, when we think about omni-channel marketing and we think about that attribution of, taking some of that channel behavior, we're actually taking those channel behaviors and we're quantifying them through those models and we're giving them hard scores. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's good. We're sort of at time and I don't see any additional questions. So I think, Richard, that's a wrap. I really wanted to thank you for sharing. To everyone who joined us today, thank you to everyone who did join us today. Really appreciate it. We'll make sure when we're running the next one that we'll invite you to that too. We hope to see you there. And we'll be doing a follow-up with the recording, which will be available next week. But please feel free to reach out to Richard if you have any questions on what they're doing at Data Axle and how they might be able to help you as well.
All right. Thank you, Jason.
So thank you.